The war between Ukraine and Russia continues with all its reality. In the last few days, there have been humiliating incidents in the Russian army. These incidents at the front hurt the Kremlin government very much. Russian forces continued limited counterattacks to regain lost positions along the Svatova-Kreminna line. Ukrainian General Staff reported that Ukrainian troops repelled Russian attacks near settlements such as Stelmakivka, Nevske, Chervonopopivka, and Bilohorivka, located within 20 kilometers of Svatova. The Ukrainian National Police reported that Russian forces hit a police department building in Lyman, Donetsk Oblast, with an S-300 missile. It was noted that the soldiers in the Russian army did not have the strength to fight at the front on the Svatova-Kreminna line, and they refused to fight. A large number of Russian soldiers in the area refused to return to the front line, which they described as hell. In line with this request of the mobilized soldiers, by order of the senior official of the Russian army, the soldiers were taken prisoner for a month on the territory of the former children's camp, Bereska, in the village of Makarovo in the Luhansk region. Soldiers who refuse to fight in the Russian army are imprisoned under harsh conditions. As we have seen before, the soldiers imprisoned in Bereska cannot meet their humanitarian needs in the same way. Russian commanders make the captured soldiers physically and psychologically intimidated so that they have to fight. In addition, the captured Russian soldiers are tasked with digging defensive positions on the front line. Some of the soldiers, who were physically hardworking and could not get enough food and water, lost their lives. However, the Russian military authorities do not care about this. There is a fortunate section among the Russian soldiers who refuse to fight. Although this group humiliates the Kremlin, they are the ones who make the right decision to save their own lives. Recently, especially in the Luhansk region, the soldiers who find the opportunity refuse to fight and surrender to the Ukrainian forces. Sergei Gaidai, head of the Luhansk Regional Military Civil Administration, stated that hundreds of Russian soldiers surrendered in the last few days. In addition, Gaidai noted that the Ukrainian troops managed to stabilize the situation in Belohorivka. Ukrainian army units now stationed there successfully repelled Russian attacks. Gaidai said the Kremlin government has changed the command of the troops in the direction of Svatova-Kremenaya for the fourth time. Russian troops in the Luhansk region are headed by an officer who commanded the failed offensive in Kiev, Gaidai reported. In the Luhansk region, Ukrainian troops managed to cover a distance of about 2.5 kilometers. Considering Russia's military concentration in the region and the number of Russian troops withdrawn in the face of Ukrainian attacks, this progress can be interpreted as a very good result. Recently, a large number of Russian soldiers on the territory of Ukraine have lost faith in the war. Russian soldiers are now completely focused on saving their lives. For this reason, with the announcement of the mobilization decree by Vladimir Putin, Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky started the I Want to Live project by making a counter-move. This project enabled people who would join the Russian army to communicate with the Ukrainian forces and surrender in a safe way. The claims of the second wave of mobilization on Russian soil and the soldiers remaining in difficult conditions in Ukraine created a density in the system. Due to this intensity, the Ukrainian authorities had to include a chatbot in the system. The Ukrainian authorities pointed out that more than 1 million people communicated with the system and that most of these people live on the territory of Russia. The Russian people learned how to save their own lives and the lives of their relatives from this bloody and unjust war waged by Vladimir Putin against Ukraine. Russian soldiers had long been crushed by the psychological pressure of the war. In particular, there was only one result reached by the Russian soldiers who served at the front for months. How can I escape this senseless war and save my life? This shows how accurate the Ukrainian leaders are and how appropriate counter-movement against Putin's mobilization. Desperate Russian soldiers now found a way to escape the persecution of the Russian army. Images, news, and audio recordings from the front in the last 3 months have reported that Russian soldiers surrendered at any cost, using various methods. When this was the case, the Kiev government did not want to let the Russian citizens down and started using drones to guide the Russian soldiers who wanted to surrender. The Ukrainian army used tens of thousands of unmanned aerial vehicles, mainly to inflict damage on Russian troops, detect Russian military formations, and monitor the movements of Russian soldiers. The Ukraine-Russia war was the first one where UAVs would be used to keep people alive. Ukraine has informed the newly surrendered soldiers with footage of a Russian soldier throwing his gun to the ground raising his hands and nervously following a path determined by a drone, leading him to soldiers from the 54th Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainian Army. Ukrainian forces believe that the use of unmanned aerial vehicles in the surrender process of Russian soldiers will make things easier for both the Russian soldiers and the Ukrainian forces. For Russian soldiers, surrender will be easier and faster with the use of drones. For the Ukrainian forces, they will not have to risk their special forces on the front. It is too early to fully analyze the drone surrender process, but the Ukrainian military believes it will be very productive. It is estimated that many demoralized Russian soldiers on the territory of Ukraine want to get rid of them as soon as possible with the help of unmanned aerial vehicles. Meanwhile, Russian forces launched another round of missile strikes targeting Ukraine's critical infrastructure. However, this tour was less intense compared to previous ones. Official Ukrainian sources stated that Russian forces launched more than 20 air-launched cruise missiles and deployed 10 Shahed 136 drones and an All-in-10 surveillance aircraft, while the Ukrainian army shot down 12 of the missiles launched with the air defense system. The Ukrainian forces stated that they shot down all the unmanned aerial vehicles. The fact that the Russians carried out an attack with less intensity than the previous attacks indicates that the Russian army is experiencing a shortage of ammunition. Kirill Budanov, the chief of the main military intelligence directorate of Ukraine, stated that Russian forces previously used 60,000 artillery shells per day, and now the figure is only at 19 to 20,000 shells. Budanov also underlined that Russian forces removed all remaining artillery ammunition from Belarusian military depots to support their operations in Ukraine. Likewise, the US Ministry of Defense reported that Russian forces currently lack the necessary artillery ammunition stockpile to support large-scale offensive operations, and that maintaining defensive operations along the front line in Ukraine requires the Russian military to spend significant numbers of shells and rockets every day. Ukrainian and Russian officials made important statements about the course of the war. However, we clearly see that the statements made by the Russian authorities are incompatible with the real situation of the war. The biggest problem in Russia during the war is the misinformation in Russian military reports. The Kremlin government, which wanted to make a move in the light of this information, had to make wrong decisions due to misdirections and personal ambitions. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu stated that the victory of Russian soldiers in Ukraine is as inevitable as the arrival of the new year. According to Shoigu's claims, Russian soldiers are defending civilians who have been subjected to genocide and violence for the right to speak Russian, an officially recognized national minority language in Ukraine. This statement goes no further than Shoigu's attempt to justify Russia's actions in Ukraine. The events in the long front line in eastern Ukraine contradict the statements of Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. The Russian army is hiding the truth from its own people and soldiers. Various propaganda did not work, and it exploded in the Kremlin's face. In a world of information and space age, it is impossible to hide such facts and isolate the public from the news. In this case, the Kiev administration opened its big heart to both the world and the Russians, being completely transparent and merciful. This attitude of Ukraine was noted by many Russian citizens and soldiers. First of all, they wanted to live, even if they were prisoners. Moreover, the Kiev administration displays a humane approach to the surrendered Russians and treats them as guests. If this process works, the Russian army will lose a great deal of power in the region. It may take less time than we anticipated for the Ukrainian army to regain control of the Luhansk region. Thanks for watching.